speaking of the spirit of positivity, Braylon Edwards, I do want to mention the Detroit Lions, if I could, because they have been getting very high marks for their previous draft.
Yep.
NFL.com has given the Lions 2021 draft class an A- grade. And I like this because this is actually a draft grade, Braylon, after we've seen the players play.
Exactly.
Not in the immediate 24 hours after the draft. You have actually seen a full season, essentially, of draft picks play. That's a very high mark for Brad Holmes' first draft as general manager of the Detroit Lions. I think that's something to be excited about.
Especially, it's an extremely high mark thinking that they only won 3 games.
Yeah, no doubt.
When you think about it that way, you're like, wow, like they have an A- grade and they won 3 games. They won 3 games. But when you watch the players that they're talking about, the guys that scored well for them, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell, you look at those guys, they played extremely well, and they got better, and they got better, and they got better, and they got better. And they made the team. Like, they helped the team out. They became the leaders on this team. So you look at Brad Holmes at a snapshot. We've had 1 draft. He's had success. He's had success, and that A-. That's really, really, really warming, knowing you're coming to a situation where you got that number 2, you got 32 and 34. His track record so far looks good.
That's all well and good, man, but this is it.
Yeah, this is it.
This is the draft.
Yeah.
2 first-round picks. I know you got a late one, but then you got an early second-round pick. So 3 of the top 34 are the Lions picks. And I'm really hoping that they can move out of that 2 hole still. Because I'm just not sold on anyone in that top 3 right now. You got Kyle Hamilton moving up the board. You got all kinds of names going on. I just don't know, man. I wouldn't mind picking up another pick.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Maz, because obviously Kyle Hamilton's name, the safety from Notre Dame, is getting a lot of talk right now, and rightfully so. But what did we say after the season ended? You are going to have months now of talking yourself into picks and talking yourself out of picks. I have talked myself into Aiden Hutchinson, Kyle Hamilton, trading out, drafting Malik Willis. I have talked myself into those 4 possibilities and everything else, by the way. I think the only thing I haven't talked myself into is taking an offensive tackle at number 2.
Yeah, that's one thing we
I really think that's what I've done.
I think with Penei Sewell, Ragnow, and Taylor Decker, we're pretty straight in that department. But no, you're right, though. You have that plenty of time, especially those teams that necessarily don't make it to bowl games or they play the bowl game early on in the year, guys that opt out of playing in their bowl game, so you haven't seen them in a long time. Let's take Kayvon Thibodeau for a second. Kayvon Thibodeau is a guy that didn't necessarily have the sacks people wanted to see him have last year as a number 1 pick. He went into the season number 1 pick overall in the draft in the mocks, and now he slid down to as much as 8th. That's because you haven't seen him. He didn't have the season that you thought he might have wanted to see out of him. How hard was he actually playing this year?
Exactly.
But once again, and that's one of Maz's big deals. Is this a guy that I can depend on? Which is a very good question. But now here's the combine. Now here's where guys are going to be back on display. Now you'll see where guys can run and jump and lateral and side to side and talk to coaches and break down defense or break down offense. And then you have pro days for guys that don't operate. So you'll get a chance to go right back up that draft board. Like I remember, I didn't do anything at the combine. So last thing they had on me was the Rose Bowl. We played against Texas. 3 touchdowns, saw that. Didn't do anything at the combine. So now all of a sudden it's
Was that on purpose?
That I didn't do the practice? Yeah, my agent told me. He was like, yeah, don't do it. So, but then you see on the mock drafts, I start going from 3 to 5 to 7 to the Vikings, or maybe slip down to 10 to the Lions, which I thought was crazy. But that's because I hadn't done anything. They hadn't seen me in a while. And then out of sight, out of mind, and they're not coming out. But then when I do pro day, it's like, no. Well, he's 3rd overall. So you just got to wait sometimes, and we will see what these guys can do.
Where did Dad want you to go?
Dad just wanted me to be happy for the most part, but probably selfishly, there's probably a couple places that he would have preferred, like the Lions. He and Matt Millen were cool, so they talked a lot. So, I mean, that was a place where probably come back home and be here. So probably here, to be honest.
On the eve of this combine, and especially the fact that it's in prime time now, there's going to be so much focus, so much talk on these guys. In Braylon, we're going to have an opportunity to talk ourselves into Aiden Hutchinson, Kyle Hamilton, Malik Willis, trading out of the pick, picking Nakobe Dean with mystery pick number 17 or whatever. I mean, it's just there's so much going on over the next week.
Jordan Davis.
Jordan Davis.
There you
Pick
go.
Jordan Davis with 32. You know what I mean? He's going to fall at 32. You're going to see all these mock drafts, right? But again, for me, this is one of those times where Brad Holmes, he has bought himself a little bit of equity with last year's draft. Regardless of what he does with that number 2 pick, regardless of who blows up this week at the Combine,
Right.
I really am, and I understand if Lions fans aren't here yet, but I really am under the presumption of, you know what, I think Brad Holmes has bought himself enough equity right now, or earned enough equity where I'm going to be okay with whatever he does with this pick at 2.
Yeah, it'd be one of those situations. I'll give you an example. The equity that he's bought himself, if he would have been in the draft, if he would have been the GM instead of Quinn in 2017 when he drafted Gerard Davis, had this been a situation like that, would we have the faith and we have the belief and we also have the proof of how Brad Holmes can draft based on last year, I would have sat back and said, even if he was drafted Jared Davis over Dalvin Cook, which I thought actually was dumb, like it was one of the dumbest moves I've seen, I would have given that a pass and said, you know what? I would have drafted Dalvin Cook, but maybe you see something that I don't see, Brad, because of what you've done in 2021. I would have given him that. That's where he's at with me. That's the equity that I would give him, agreeing to what you're saying. Like, hey, man, you know what? I don't know about that move, but because I seen you did it and you have a track record to prove it, I'll give you this and we'll see how it plays out.
What's your gut tell you right now, Braylon, on the eve of the Combine? What's your gut tell you right now?
Aiden Hutchinson?
Yeah, me too.
Aiden Hutchinson. I just don't think you can get from around it. Like, this is one of those interesting drafts. I think that's why it's also so interesting and so, of course, interesting makes interesting, but because there is no number 1 overall. Like I even think, you know, we're forcing Jacksonville to draft Evan Neal. Evan Neal's not even the best lineman in the draft.
Right.
Like he's not even the best lineman in the draft. He just happens to be a left tackle that played at Alabama. It's this type of draft, I think, with Aiden Hutchinson, and even Aiden Hutchinson, you can argue against, well, he only did it for 1 year. What I saw enough out of him, he's a player. He comes to play. He brings his hard hat. He brings his lunch pail. He can get to the quarterback. He plays rush. He plays off the ball. He plays the pass game. He plays the running game. At the end of the day, like, he checks enough boxes to where I feel safe with that pick. And it sucks that you have to feel safe, but I think that's the safest pick that you can make. Because even Kyle Hamilton, he wasn't nowhere to be found 2 years ago. So, I mean, it's...
And there's something to be said for getting after the quarterback in the NFL, right? I mean, if you look at the playoffs this season, I mean, you look at what happened to Tom Brady when he had a little bit of pressure in his face. You see what happened to Ryan Tannehill when he had a little bit of pressure in his face. I mean, you just see up and down. Kyler Murray, who we'll talk about next. You saw what happened when Aaron Donald was in his face. Von Miller was in his face. I mean, that is something that the Detroit Lions have an absolute need for, a desire for. There's a guy that you've had the ability to scout locally here for
the whole season, the last 365 days.
I mean, you know everything about him. I do think when it's all said and done, they'll pick Aiden Hutchinson.
You gotta look at the trenches. The trenches is where you want to shore up. You look at what happened to Michigan. What was the difference in Michigan this year? It was the trenches. They were good defensively. They were good offensively. They were good to the tune of the number 1 offensive line, and they were good to the tune of the best defensive player offensive line. When you watch this, man, like you're already shoring up your offensive line. You got Ragnar. You got Taylor Decker. You have Penei Sewell. We've talked about that. Now you got to go get a guy that can get to the quarterback. You got to get a guy that can get 15 sacks, 14 sacks, 14 and a half, 17 sacks. Because when you look at the playoffs, you know, you see the Rams. I see Aaron Donald and Von Miller and Leonard Floyd. You see the Bengals. I see Hendrickson. Hendrickson had 15 sacks last year and he was a Pro Bowl player for the Cincinnati Bengals. You name team, I see guys getting to the quarterback. That's what the Lions don't have. They got to get a guy that can get to the quarterback, and that guy is probably Aiden Hutchinson. You've reached the end of the video. You know what you should do? Press like. You know you like the content that we have here at Woodward Sports Network. I'm Braylon Edwards from the bottom line. Subscribe to us right now.